everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and it's such an amazing feeling to see all these people that I've known for so many years as part of the Digital Commons community, as part of the Elsevier community. But what's also really amazing for me is I kind of grew up on this campus. I was a grad student here, and then I've been bringing my kids here, looking at the dinosaur skeletons, looking at all of the beautiful artwork and the amazing the landscape. I've been telling everybody about the landscaping. So it's really just a thrill to be here today. I'd like to invite our panelists up to the stage. So Becky, Thoms, Cyril, Oberlander, and Roger Weaver. And I think we'll get started on our panel. So do you have some slides, right? Okay. Okay, I'm going to sit down too. And I am just really overwhelmed that we have such a superstar panel here today. And also what's really fun for me is these are folks that I've been talking to for so many years and I've learned so much from. So, Becky, I think you and I started talking in 2014 when the first OSTP memo came out. And, Cyril and I have been talking about open access textbooks, and Roger and I have been talking about all sorts of IR things over the years. We even went wine tasting once, I think, at one of the user groups. So it's really wonderful to have this brain trust here and to get us started to accomplish a little bit of what Tracy and Judy talked about in building that community and telling the stories and being authentic and having some candor too. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start off with having each of our panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their campus and the repository. And what I really like to do is, we learn a lot about our repositories from the collections that we have. And so I'm going to ask each of them to share a few collections that really tell the story of their repository and their open access projects on campus. So Cyril, would you like to get started?
Oh, darn. Okay, yes, I will. Well, I don't see the slides, so that's fine. Well, if you were going to see the slides, you'd see something called Courageous Quintos students. They are a group of students that in 2 classes produce one phenomenal journal that is incredible. It's called Courageous Quintos because that is courageous conversations. These are counter-narratives that students produce that are very powerful. The picture of them, it tells so much about what the importance is of an institutional repository. It is not a storage of PDFs. It is really transforming students into authors. When you see their transformation in action, where you see that they are published in print and in digital, you see a transformed person, and you see what learning matters, why learning matters so much. So that's one of our journals that's tremendous. The other is the Idea Fest journal. But I want to point out an Ithaca report that I think really matters, and that is the second digital transformation of scholarly publishing. I highly recommend this because what it says on page 37 and 38 is it's about making meaning. And that is very much what I really wanted to share with you all. I would love to share the 3D herbarium, but if you're interested in seeing more about that, our library propaganda is over on the table in the front, and you're welcome to take a look at it. Thank you.
There we go. Thanks, Promita. Thanks, Cyril. So my name is Becky Thoms, and I am the head of Research Impact and Publishing at Utah State University, which is a public land grant and space grant institution. So some of the projects that I thought, and it's hard to choose, honestly, but some that kind of highlight what our institutional repository has been doing. So I picked a couple. One is that we host conference proceedings for something called the Small Satellite Conference, which is an international conference that has been happening since 1987. We have the proceedings going back to 1987, which was great, and that was exciting. It was one of the first things we did was to bring in those physical materials. But now we host the proceedings, that information goes live that the day the conference goes live, so all of the attendees can see that content. So that's something we do that is very high profile, very anxiety inducing every summer when it happens. But it is really exciting to see when that material goes live that day. I mean, the board just lights up as people, attending the conference begin. Actually, when it turns over midnight, you can see they must be sitting in their hotel rooms waiting. It's kind of funny. So, so that's one that we're really proud of. It's really exciting. It is a big lift. That's all we do in the weeks leading up to it. I wanted to highlight a couple of journals that we host, two in particular, one called Human Wildlife Interactions, which was a traditional print subscription-based journal going back, I think, a couple of decades or more. They wanted us to help them preserve that content, so that's what we started doing. Then they said, well, let's make some of the content available, new content available digitally. So we started doing that. And eventually they said, no, we're going all in on open access and publishing everything open access through Digital Commons. And that's highly successful, very popular journal. One of our most downloaded items in the IR is an article from that journal about human-wildlife interactions. I think people are looking for bear attack stuff, and that's how they find it. But you know what? They get real information, so that's okay. And then a new journal we have, which is from our Transforming Communities Institute, and I picked that one. They only have one issue, but it was really interesting to me to hear the founding editor speak about why she wanted to start this journal and why it was so important that it was open access. So she's in social work. She does a lot of community-based research, and she was working with a nonprofit organization on a particular research project, and she wrote about it. She published on it because she's a tenure-track faculty member, and that's what she has to do. And after the article came out and she was speaking with her community partner, and the partner said, oh, well, I can't read the article because it's behind a paywall. And she just said she had this moment where we can't be doing research with and about these people who can't even access the content. So she said we have to have a journal that is entirely open access. So that's what motivated her. And I had one, I'm forgetting what was my third highlight. So I tried to pick three things that were very different. We have a lot of bee research that happens at Utah State University, funded by the USDA. And as part of that, these researchers who are very dedicated have acquired an unbelievable collection of print scientific material going back some 100 years in lots of different languages, not available anywhere else. So this is content, and they have thousands of articles. Some of it you can find. There are repositories that host it, but some of it doesn't exist anywhere else. And they are really motivated to make that research available to the world because it is such an important area of research right now. So. And thankfully, they have some USDA funds, so periodically they come to us with some money. So we dive in and we check out the copyright and we look for all the different languages and see what we can do to try to make that really unique scientific material available. So those are just a few things that keep us busy.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Roger Weaver. I'm the Associate Dean of Libraries at the Missouri University of Science and Technology in beautiful Rolla, Missouri. The city motto there is we are in the middle of everywhere, which translates to we're in the middle of nowhere, Missouri. But at any rate, we're pretty close to some major areas. But our center of interest, obviously, is science and technology. When I first arrived 15 years ago, I was arriving as the newly minted institutional repository librarian. And when I gave that presentation that we all give when we're applying for jobs or on campus, I focused upon the role of the institutional library as a builder of community. And I have focused my career that way. So I believe IRs are about community. They're about building community, and they're about servicing community. And I wanted to feature 3 of our collections that I believe kind of exemplify this. And they're also, quite frankly, our most popular collections that we have in our repository. And you forgive me, I'm going to have to refer to my notes because academics tend to have long titles and give things. But we host 2 conferences in our repository, which were homegrown. They started on our little campus in Rolla, Missouri, and quickly moved to only be able to be hosted in large metropolitan areas in the United States. So St. Louis, Chicago, those types of cities. And these 2 conferences focused upon something that people really don't think about, and that is failure. It is the idea to grow a better building, to understand why that building fell down in an earthquake, why that dam failed. We have to understand failure. And so these conferences focused upon that, and they became very popular globally for that. One of them is the International Conference on Recent Advances in Geotechnical Earthquake Engineering, breath. And then the other one is soil dynamics and excuse me, I mispronounced that. It's earthquake engineering and soil dynamics. And then the second conference is International Conferences on Case Histories in Geotechnical Engineering. And as I said, both of these conferences started out small. They started out with small print-only runs. So the information, which is very valuable, was already restricted in that it was in a few 300, 400 copies of journal proceedings that typically the members walked away with. We did have some of it digitized. It was some of it available through a publisher online. But the faculty member who started that was reaching the end of his career and really wanted this information to be more globally acceptable or accessible. So we worked with him and with the publishers to get open access permissions to make this information available. So this is our 2 most popular collections in our institutional repository, accounting for around 40% of our total downloads, which average around 2.5 million downloads a year, because it has information that's valuable today because it concentrates on failure. And it's very interesting, particularly with the earthquake conference, when you watch those pin drops, how many people use the pins on the digital. So when you watch those pins drop, particularly for the earthquake engineering conferences, they're dropping in areas, earthquake-prone regions of the world. So it's this visual evidence that this small little community in Rolla is now servicing a much larger community globally. So the second collection is the Way We When You Center for Cold Form Steel. So it's actually a digital library, started out as a physical library on our campus again. And when I walked, I came from humanities background, I had no clue what cold form steel was. I thought, oh, they make steel and it's cold. Well, actually, it's just less hot. But at any rate, it houses specifications and very important to that particular industry. And so even though the physical library is no longer, we digitized all the content, the second most accessed collection. So again, something that grew locally, that had the support of the steel industry globally, and that we were able to surface to the rest of the world. And the third collection I want to talk about is something that's, I think, near and dear to many people who manage institutional repositories, our theses and our dissertations of our graduate students. I imagine the day when, it was set on your shelf. It was a book, it sat on your shelf, and maybe somebody found it in the catalog. And we have a mandate on our campus now that they're all digitized. And so they're all available in our institutional repository, our third most accessed collection in our repository. Our students are now getting quoted from their theses and their dissertations and publications, and I'm the one that that answers the phone when somebody says, well, I want to use this figure in this, what do I do? And luckily we were able to probably connect them to the student authors. But again, the ability to take that thing, that article, digital article, that the artifact that the student worked on, and make that globally accessible it's very powerful. It not only features what the campus is good at and the research that we specialize in, but it gives that student that early exposure to digitization and the ability to be published. So,
Wow. I can't imagine a better way to start off. Thank you so much for those stories. And, our panel is titled Innovation and Impact, and I think you all 3 really just demonstrated that so well. It looks like, Cyril, some of the slides might be available. And I'm going to give you another chance to.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, this is great, you guys. Thank you very much. So these are the students in Courageous Cuentos. So imagine that they have a digital production, they get their monthly emails, which is really an incredible way of saying your voice matters. They also get a print version. We put everything on Amazon for print on demand, and so that's where the real impact happens, actually. When they hold it in print and they show their family and friends, they are authors and they are transformed. When they read their stories, we're in tears. Connecting people and ideas is what we do, and if an IR can make that possible, then we have to find the workflow to transform every silly class assignment that doesn't go beyond the class walls into something that the world gets to see and hear. That's the power of this kind of a production. The IdeaFest Journal, by the way, our celebration of scholarship and creativity every year, is both a journal as well as a day of celebration in the library. So you're all invited. You'll see food, dance, theater performed in the library, music performed on the first floor, and about 300 poster presentations all in the library to really celebrate this wonderful work of an academic year culminates in something very special. Ooh, let's see if this works. I'm going to also share some of the other IR work that we're doing, not in Digital Commons, but it would be great to see in Digital Commons. This is the 3D digital herbarium, and I don't know if somebody can click on the video, but let me see if it works. Nope, okay. But the video is the voices of botany students and computer science students. The botany students are annotating the three-dimensional objects of plants. And this is connected to iNaturalist as well as Sketchfab, a number of APIs, because we're trying to make this knowledge available for everybody. And ideally, the botany students are communicating from 8th grade on up to really inspire people to know what botany is about. So a lot of what we're doing in institutional repositories is really not only connecting to the community at large, we're also recruiting, creating inspiring learning environments. That's what an IR should be. Now, this is the GIS Data Archive, where one of our students last spring was doing AI stitching of aerial photography to connect up with the GIS data and historic maps. How do we create an institutional repository that not only preserves and makes accessible GIS data, but actually creates an interface where you play with different data, you put it together and export it into something new with all the attributions of the works that were contributed. IRs need to be about the use and the play and the exploration. And so that's how we try to connect people with ideas in an institutional repository. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I think all of these stories really show like whether it's a journal or a conference or some interesting GIS project or the ETDs you were talking about, or those, the earthquake, the earthquake research Roger was talking about. So much of it is about that connection and bringing, really the stories of the research that's happening, the innovation that's happening on campus to life and making it accessible to the broader public. I want to switch tracks for just a minute from talking about these fun stories and projects. We'll get back to them, but I want to switch tracks for a minute, and I want to ask you a little bit about what are you seeing, working in your roles in the library as like sort of the strategic initiatives that are happening on campus now, and how are you finding your library connecting up with the bigger strategic discussions happening on campus? And Becky, maybe I'll start with you, and then we'll switch it around.
Sure. And, as I was reflecting on this question, I feel like the answers we've already started leading to them with some of our conversations. So we have new administration on our campus, a new president, lots of new folks. So the conversations, I'm guessing they're going to be very familiar to all of you. So student enrollment, the research impact, especially as a public institution, and speaking to the people who provide those public funds, so your legislators at the state level, helping them understand what the institution does and why it matters. And then very generally, just the pace of change in higher education. I feel like it's every other headline, right, in Inside Higher Ed and the Chronicle, stories in that vein. So I think those are three big things that are driving a lot of the discussion on campus. The research impact one, that one, I feel like in the library, especially if you work with an institutional repository, you're like, yes, because this is what we've been talking about for how long, and it's the story we want to tell, and it's where we see an opportunity for the library to really engage and have a role. And so it's kind of exciting to see that conversation really gaining traction on campus, and especially this idea of connecting research to the community so they can consume it, but sometimes they're actually contributing to the research, right? So with the editor I mentioned who said she works with community groups. So we see that really as a space where the library, but the IR in particular, can really have a role. And I think with the student enrollment, I think sometimes that's so focused on the academic departments, and so the library is a little bit tangential. But I feel like the stories that Cyril and Roger were telling, where you're bringing students into this process of creating knowledge and creating content, so they're not just end-of-road consumers of these products, which I think traditionally is where the library really had that role. Like, you help students find research. No, we help students create research, like really flipping the script, I think, and helping students see themselves throughout that research life cycle. And so how that could potentially impact student enrollment, I think, or have a role, for the library, is because that raises the profile of your institution and your students and the work that's happening across the spectrum, which, I don't work in admissions or recruiting, but I have to think that that's going to make their jobs a lot easier. And then the pace that, in higher education and how things are changing, what really speaks to me there is the interdisciplinarity angle, because I think that is so important when we're trying to tackle these questions. Somebody talked a little bit about silos. I think it was actually Judy in her introduction, talking about silos within our company. And we all, I would imagine, on our campuses bang our heads against the wall with the silos that we struggle with. And that to really deal with, whether global problems or just problems on our campus or in our state or in our region, you have to have these interdisciplinary conversations. And who better than the library to facilitate that interdisciplinary angle? I feel like that's our place, right? Like, so it's such an obvious role for us. And I feel like more than ever, people are starting to see us the way we've always seen ourselves. So I do feel like we're at a really critical moment in terms of how the library is engaging in these conversations and being able to really realize the things that we have, a lot of us in this room probably have thought about for a long time. So.
Great. I'm going to go over to you, Roger.
So, okay, is that working? It is? All right. So there's three things on our campus that kind of ring as themes when we talk about this. And the first one is enrollment and retention. I think that's common to everybody right now. And the second one is research, innovation, and entrepreneurial thinking. How to encourage that. And then the third one is regional economic development, finding our place in our region, in our community. And I think the power of the IR, it's self-evident that it's a resource, and it goes back to it's not just a place to find a PDF. So I think, resources play a role, and that's one way to sell the IR. But when people talk to me about, for example, enrollment and retention, conversations inevitably spin around to the library as space and places for the students to meet, places for collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. And the administration is very comfortable in that conversation when it comes to physical space. But when it comes to G, let's also incorporate into that conversation the idea of digital space. And so that's kind of where I think the repository can have a role, and we've all given examples of exciting things that are happening, but I kind of want to go out there and talk about collaboration. So when we talk about student theses and dissertations, just give one example. Boy, wouldn't it be nice to get in front of the advisors and say, well, you know, if student X is researching this particular topic, here are 55, already existing, pieces of research in the institutional repository. How can we build connections there? So I won't take a lot of time, but I do think that, we need to amp up our conversations about digitization as space and digitization as services around publication, for example, giving the students a voice, we're actually starting this spring a research conference both for graduate and undergraduate students, and a component of that is not only that the conference is going to be hosted in Digital Commons, is that we're going to start an open access journal around that as well. So again, it gets into that idea of collaboration. And research innovation, I think that's kind of clear. Again, it goes into collaboration, it goes into publication in particular. I know we're a little behind the times because I've played multiple roles on campus. We're now finally finding our footing again. But next week I'm having my first meeting with DataCite because we're starting to issue DOIs, and I've been having conversations with our research labs about getting that data surface by assigning a DOI. So again, I think that's a role as well. And that data, of course, will be housed in an IR.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Cyril?
This is a great question, but I want to ask you all, how much has recruitment increased in terms of priorities at your campus? Can you raise your hand? Let's be honest, folks. Okay, increasingly, this has become a huge issue. But I would say it's also retention. We see way too many students that leave us. So how do we make inspiring learning happen on our campus? Ironically, it's partly the IR. We have a press. We call it the press at Cal Poly Humboldt. We established it in 2015, and it has become very much a part of the brand of not only the campus, but also the departments that publish with us. So the Critical Race, Gender, Sexuality Studies produces Courageous Cuentos. Toyon has a long history, but they're publishing with us. The Geographers Group and some amazing journals and publications. The departments see it as a brand, as a way of recruiting, and as a way of relating to donors. All of these are important issues, but also retaining students because they get a voice. An area that innovation is so important is how do you connect the community? If it's only one way, meaning if it's people out beyond the scholarly, the academy can access our PDFs, that's great, but it's also one way. How do we engage the community in publications is important too. And so whether it's citizen science or it's a part of the review process or something, we need to find ways to connect the community, and that'll help. Recruitment, I'm going to just say, is incredibly important. And it is nice to have a brand that's recognized by the campus so that this year, during budget reductions, the campus decided to pay for the subscription for Digital Commons from now on. So that's a huge progress in shifting it from a library repository to an institutional repository where they see the value in it and they see the transformation in both the curriculum and the co-curriculum. Thank you.
Wow, congratulations. That's a great story, yeah. And I know that's one that so many in the community struggle with in terms of funding it and in terms of seeing the repository moving from like a sort of library-focused project to something that really is supporting all of these strategic initiatives on campus. And so it sounds like all three of you are pretty unified in talking about recruitment and retention, student retention as a key theme. And then also, demonstrating research impact. And what I love about the stories you're telling and about the way you're talking about research impact, about both of these challenges, is, you're bringing it back to this idea of, the library supporting researchers as a producer of content rather than just as a consumer. So all of these like creative acts that, whether it's students or faculty members or in these kind of interesting interdisciplinary projects or the community and academic projects together are reinforcing some of that. So thank you so much for those stories. I want to kind of, now that we have this great vision that we've presented, I actually kind of wanted to see if we could go back a little bit in time and talk a little bit about, when initially your IRs got started, since all three of you have very established programs, and sort of what was the initial initiative or the impetus around starting the IR? And then how has that evolved? Originally we think about like the idea of green OA as, the sort of inspiration for IRs. How has it evolved? And then, what are some of the things that have surprised you? And Roger, I wanted to start with you here.
Well, our IR started about 20 years ago, and I arrived 15, so it had been running for 5 years. And as I said, when I arrived, it was hosted in this content management system called Documentum. I frankly don't know whether it exists anymore or not, but it was kind of hidden. It had 14,000 objects. Most of them were theses and dissertations and a few faculty works. And it was conceived as kind of the classic traditional view of an IR, open access. It was conceived as, it was being managed out of the technical services department of the library, so it was perceived as like just an extension to the catalog. It was a very traditional approach, and I showed up, which apparently, and I think I was selected because I didn't have a traditional view on what IRs are, and like going, no, we need to be out and about. We need to be having conversations. We need to be working. How we can service our campus. This is not a static library collection. This is something that's living and breathing. And so I kind of started, and I'm not going to go through the whole career, but it started out as traditional. Started out as very classic view of IRs, and it has grown. In the early years, we all kind of go for that low-hanging fruit. Well, what's the easiest thing to do? And it's like, oh, I've got 60,000 theses and dissertations sitting on a shelf. There's where I'm going to start. So we're going to digitize that. So I think early on that was the strength, and I think I started transitioning more into faculty work. And I don't know how many of you have had our experience, and I know all campus environments are different, but it's difficult. It's difficult to convince a faculty member that you need that preprint or that you need that postprint in the repository. And so we kind of grew our repository on the lines of, well, maybe we could do without it. Maybe it would basically be another place to find the work, link out to where it is, that type of thing. But at least it became a collection of all of our faculty work, not just some of it, and including things that at that time weren't open access. We were just linking out to it. But that built a good rapport with the faculty, and it was on a non-traditional approach, but the faculty were like going, oh, I want this in the repository. Here's my CV. Can you help me out doing this? And so we started building from that perspective as well. So as far as what surprises me, I think the surprise has been the impact of the students, the student research. I think theses and dissertations continue to surprise me. Is these wonderful gems of work that have for so long been set static on a shelf somewhere, and you give them the light of day, you get them digital, you get them out there, and I'm surprised at the reactions. I look at the download counts, and I see, oh, well, here's the thesis been downloaded 500 times. Where are they downloading us? You start going and looking at the dashboards. It's amazing. So I think the most surprising thing to me is what I think IRs are best at, which is getting that local content out and getting that exposure. And the student exposure is important to me because that's what we're there to do. And that's been the surprise.
Wonderful. I'm going to just keep mixing it up. So Cyril, do you want to go next?
I'll just share that about 13, 14 years ago, I started the Open SUNY textbook program in New York. And for me, it was about trying to create an educational opportunity that is more affordable, but also more relevant, to have students be included in creating relevant textbooks. But in New York, we had a strong programmers group in the library. So we used OMP, Open Monograph Press, and Open Journal Systems. When I moved to Cal Poly Humboldt, it really required a different shift in thinking. So Digital Commons made a lot of sense because of the services that were provided. but it also allowed us to focus on creating the press and the editorial workflow that includes students in the text layout, post-production, peer review process management. And so it created infrastructure that was much needed. Our goal is that every student publish before they graduate, and we're publishing over 600 authored works a year. So to us, it's a tremendous asset that we are thinking this is really surprisingly not about post or preprint. It's really about publishing with students and engaging them in something transformative. So that was my surprise.
Thank you. And over to you, Becky.
So our IR similarly sounds like a similar age. So I think it started in 2008, and it was both very traditional and non-traditional in its origins. So traditional theses and dissertations, like absolutely that was one of the foundational elements. But at that same time, there were two other large collections that we built, and I say that's the royal we because I wasn't there in 2008, but. We have a really robust extension program at Utah State University. So they had historical documents, their newsletters, and all the things that extension offices publish, which some of you might be familiar with. And that was information they really wanted preserved. And so, which has been interesting, but that is one of the core elements of our IR is a lot of extension material. And then the third piece was we had Utah State was involved in a program with NASA called the Getaway Special, where students could send experiments into space, and this goes back decades, and they were one of our earliest partners. They wanted to capture the history and the documentation about these Getaway Special experiments. So we really had a kind of a wide range of things that created the origins of our IR. And I would say our mission, in some ways, I mean, what we're doing a lot of different things and new things are happening all the time, but that idea of, preserving this material and then providing access to it, like that hasn't changed. I think what we are seeing a lot more focus on is what Cyril and Roger have been talking about is this engagement with all of our researchers, but especially our student researchers on this entire process and what it means to really understand the creation of research and content all the way, from the ideation phase to the dissemination phase. And I'm always surprised by the IR. I mean, because it's been around since 2008, I'm surprised by stuff that I find in there like, what is this and where did it come from? And I'm talking about things about demon folklore, which apparently we have a lot of, and it's really popular. So when I get phone calls, because my number is the one that's listed on the page, it's from people who want to know about demon exorcism, like not my area of expertise, but apparently we've got some popular content in that area. But then I'm surprised by the new things that come through the door. We recently built a new campus. We have a really robust statewide campus system that stretches into the really remote parts of Utah and the really rural parts of the state, and we built a new campus center in southern Utah, and they wanted to create a time capsule as part of the foundations for this new center they were building, and they wanted help documenting everything about that time capsule and the process of its creation and its content. So you just never know when you answer your phone what you might be asked about.
Between the demon folklore and the bear attacks, Becky, you're setting a high bar. I'm actually really curious in hearing you all talk. I know there's a few people here that just are starting up their repositories for the first time, and I'm wondering if you have a repository that's within its first 1 to 5 years, could you raise your hand? We've got a lot of folks out there. Yeah, so I would love to see this conversation continue because I think the idea of starting a repository, 10, 15 years ago, and kind of what the definition of a repository was or what it could do versus starting one now is, we've seen a real sea change. So it would be really interesting for me to see how the institution or university management is buying into the repository and whether, the student narrative that's coming up from all three of your stories and anecdotes are, if that's something that is that you're also seeing out there as you get started. Our next question was actually around how do the IR programs support student success, but you've already talked about it so much, and I've given such great examples. But I wonder too, maybe you could talk a little bit about, in addition to the recruitment and retention issues, like are there new offices, a new kind of university initiatives that we're seeing trends to support student work. I've been hearing about a few here, and you guys have all talked about it. Cyril, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. But I first want to say thank you all for being a part of the institutional repository process. Our staff and our students, they really make a huge difference, and librarians about how we produce things. So the press, Kyle Morgan, Sarah Godlin, and the students, they're amazing at Cal Poly Humboldt. But in terms of innovation or offices, we have the press. That's an office that's recognized on the campus. We also have what we just started calling the Library Innovation Hub, where our research compliance officers are now housed in the library. So interestingly, the IRB process, the IACUC, is all part of the library process now. Thankfully, I didn't have to fund it. But it becomes another touch point for researchers because that allows us to talk to them early on about publications, data management plans with the repositories. So trying to find a nice way to create those sticky connections with our researchers, our students, and surprisingly, our community. About 200 of the 600 authored works a year are community members, emeritus faculty and staff, and it's the community members that want to write stories that are important. So it is very much a new way of thinking about an office that produces content for distribution, and it's reaching a lot of people.
Great. Why don't we go to Becky? We'll just come back this way.
So one group I've already talked a little bit about, and that's the Transforming Communities Institute, which is a new group on our campus. So I think I've already mentioned, that we see, we're publishing the journal. They, as part of that initiative, they are creating something called the Community Engaged Scholars Network, which is, it's kind of that two-way, I don't remember actually if it was Cyril or Roger who mentioned it's got to go both directions. You want the research going out to the community, but you want the community to also be able to contribute and be part of that conversation, and that's really part of their mission. And this is still in kind of its foundational phases. So, but we are working closely with them. We being the library. The other area we've talked just a little bit about is the Open Educational Resources Program. So that is an area where we do administer and own the program in the library, but it is very much a campus-wide initiative with support from the Provost's office and our Center for Teaching Excellence. And so that's a big focus right now, and we're kind of recalibrating, as I'm sure many of you are, with the new flat rate models that are coming online on so many campuses that has kind of really upset things, and so we're kind of figuring out what does that mean. Interestingly, it does not mean diminished interest in OER, at least that's not what we are finding. So we are really trying to think strategically about how we talk with our campus store and how we talk with those partners to continue that work. And it's actually another space where we really see some opportunity for student involvement, because I think the faculty and instructors who are really engaged in OER creation are interested in thinking about their teaching differently, and that can mean really making the students part of that process. So they're not creating OER for the students, they're creating OER with their students. So that's something that's exciting. We have an innovation hub too, but it's actually our digital scholarship space. But it is being funded by multiple partners across campus, and we're a little bit behind the curve on that one. So we were out there on the edge with IRs. We're a little bit behind on the digital scholarship end, but we just opened the space in the library, and we absolutely see a lot of opportunity for collaboration there. So bringing these interdisciplinary student, faculty, community researchers together, what are they going to create and how are we going to tell those stories? And I see the institutional repository having a role in that conversation.
Great, and over to you, Roger.
Sure. We're kind of in a changing, transformative environment. I think that's probably true for every institution in a way. But one of the most interesting things that I think, and positive things that have happened with the library on our campus, is that we operated out of the humanities and social sciences, the college, a writing center that supported undergraduate student writing, particularly if you needed assistance, and looking at how better to serve all of our students, not just our graduate students, but also faculty. The decision was made to bring the writing center out from that particular college, and it's now does now report to the dean's office in the library. So it's become it's an integrated component of library services now, and we've rebranded that to be Library and Communication Center, and we're expanding its functions to support not just undergraduates with perhaps writing needs, but to support graduate students in writing their thesis, to support faculty, et cetera, et cetera. We have a tentative strategic plan on that. It'll probably change, but we're kind of growing that. And that's a very recent addition. And in fact, the renovation for their space in the building isn't done yet. So hopefully it's going to be done by the end of the semester. So I think that's a good example of this. And while I'm on that topic of creativity, there's something I wanted to mention in the earlier question that I think is very important and tends to kind of get to the bottom of the discussion list when we talk about IRs, and that's creative works. And I'm talking about short story. I'm talking about podcasts that are originating in classroom assignments. I'm talking about poems. I'm talking about art contests. I'm talking about all those things that happen in your campus as a community that could have a home in the IR. So we actually do a student art in the library competition. We stopped it at COVID. We're now trying to bring it back. But very popular, and it was, physical display of art in the library, awards. The students got that experience of like displaying in a gallery. We had local artists come in and judge it, and it ends up digital online in the end. And so I think creative works and working with faculty who have classroom assignments that are generating those types of works and then bringing them into the repository is a very powerful way of the library to connect out to the rest of the campus. But back to this other example, we also have in the library, it is not part of the reporting structure, but has a very close relationship with the library, is our cafe office, and I'm not going to bother trying to explain what that acronym means, because we also actually have a coffee shop in the library called The Cafe. But the cafe office that I am talking about is early career support for faculty. So that office is in the library, and we work very closely with them, and I have an opportunity through Cafe to meet every new incoming faculty member. And so I sit down with every new incoming faculty member, and I talk about particularly what the library can do in general for them, but also specifically in the IR and in our faculty profiling and all the services that we offer. So we get right in front of them up front, and then try to develop a relationship and then bring that relationship forward. The third example would be our relationship with our graduate student office. That's where the theses and dissertations originate with. So again, through workshops and other modes, I have an opportunity to get in front of every graduate student. And so we start working with them. And one of my I'm often referred to as the copyright policeman on campus, but that's one of my roles. And so, I get to talk about copyright and those types of things, but it also gives us an opportunity to introduce them to the idea of publishing and to publish in Scholar's Mind, which is our institutional repository. So those are the three examples I would have.
Fantastic. Thank you both, or thank you all three. I'm noticing that we need to move to our audience Q&A, but I had two more questions for you. But in a way, you've all really covered it. You mentioned the journal, the student journal you're starting. Becky, you've been talking about human-wildlife interactions and all of the amazing journals you have. And Cyril, you're supporting your press with Digital Commons and student work, faculty journals, and these community and university journals as well. I just wanted to see if you guys had a few, comments you might want to talk about, like why has starting publishing programs, journals and books especially, been helpful strategically for the university? Cyril, let me start with you.
I'll be short. If everyone has read Roy Rosenzweig's Can History Be Open Source, I would highly recommend it. He basically said that we need to be where the learners are and where learning happens. I'll add to that, we also have to make learning inspiring and engaging. And the IR allows us to do that in a way that we have not traditionally done. Bookshelves are not as incredibly inspiring to people. I know that's awful for me to say, but I think we all see it. PDFs are actually going that way too. How do we make learning engaging is we include the students in the production, we include the community in the production, we curate a new type of content creation and engagement. And I'm really inspired by that, so I'd encourage you to read that article because it's a very fun one. Thank you.
And Becky, would you chime in a little bit about your projects?
Sure. I mean, I think, as you alluded to, Promita, we've covered a lot of this. I was glad that to hear copyright mentioned, Roger, because, yeah, maybe not the most exciting, but there are practical building blocks that are really important in all of this work. And in order to do the aspirational, high impact, fun, exciting things, you have to know and think about things like copyright and metadata. And so bringing that into the process and helping our students learn about that, all of our researchers, let's be honest, not just our students, need to learn about those things, is an important part of the process. And that's what allows this impact to happen. But I think, again, some of it's practical. Those things are practical. Speaking to our legislators in the state of Utah who are so important and so critical to our funding, that matters. And this is another tool that we can use to do that. Like, it helps our cause that when people search topics in Google, they find things that are in the institutional repository. And so, because legislators are people and they're Googling things just like everyone else. And so we, every one of those is an opportunity and a moment. And then the last thing, and I don't know if this even qualifies as an initiative, but it is something we've really been working hard with our graduate students to think about Creative Commons licenses on their theses and dissertations. I know, Roger, you mentioned you get contacted, can I use this? And helping our students understand, like, you want your work to be used and cited, and make it clear to those end users that this is what you want and this is how they do it. So that's been an exciting thing for us. It's a good education opportunity, and I think it has, potential for real impact as well.
Amazing. I'm going to actually move on to the audience questions. I have about 10 more questions I want to ask you, so I'm going to be hunting you down afterwards, and I hope we can all be talking later. But I'm going to open it up to audience Q&A, and I think Sophia is in the audience with the microphone. So any questions?
We got it now.
Hi. You talk a lot about collaboration, and it sounds like a lot of it is happening in physical spaces and in the library, like the physical space. What about collaboration online? A lot of us have transitioned to, remote work or hybrid. A lot of our students are primarily online. So how do you make those same connections online to help, foster these communities and increase publishing that way?
Okay. I think when I speak of collaboration, I speak of how to connect researchers with other researchers, not only in our own campus but across the world. And I think one of the things that we're doing is we're moving toward I know Elsevier's product Pure, which has the ability to connect researchers together and those types of things. I think that's one way of doing it. And yes, you're right, the physical space and the physical space is in fact important. I mean, that's where I meet all of my faculty and all of our students. I think one of the ways that we try to accomplish that is to do interest group conversations in the library, like research interest groups and those types of, to encourage people to get together with common interests and have conversations in the hopes that that will lead to something else. Those are two ideas that come to my mind, or just the simple little thing of, yeah, Dr. Smith, I know that Dr. Jones is also researching in this similar area. Have you met him? No. Well, then let me introduce you. And from that route, I'll take.
And I'll add to that it was tough during COVID. We did a lot of Idea Fest celebrations online through Zoom and tried to create the same kind of poster sessions. And we learned a lot from it. Some of it was everyone was zoomed out, but some of it actually worked. But one thing that worked really well is Zoom office hours was actually a really good idea for various offices that held open Zoom hours, and people would come in and want to chat. But really it comes down to programming. We have to be better at programming that connects people. What does reading engagement look like, a social reading look like online? Because we know what they look like physically. Every time we do it, we get people to check out the books. So how do we do it online? The other is, please look at the community citizen science projects out there. They are amazing. iNaturalist is like 7.3 million users and hundreds of millions of observations. It's a repository of sorts, but it's really a community that's engaged about the animals and vegetation that they care about. How are they existing? How do they work? And how do we connect with them? Thank you.
I'm gonna, yeah.
I had a question about if any of you all assign Creative Commons licensing by default.
We're not doing it by default yet. I think with our specifically with our theses and dissertations, that is what we would like to move to, but it's a slow transition. So it's opt-in right now, but I could definitely see a world where it could become opt-out, but I don't think we have any. The only exception would be, I guess, with some of the journals or conferences that are organized, the organizers or the editors have made decisions that everything will be, so it is opt-out. But that's partly driven by us because it's a conversation, but it really is ultimately their decision. So we can't take credit for it.
And we are opt-out. It is by default for theses and dissertations because it's a mandate. And the only time that doesn't happen would be if it's a sponsored research or security-sensitive research, and we would know. It's typically, that's what the student sees, and then there has to be some other mechanism going on to prevent that from happening.
And for us, it's definitely a public license unless they wanted to create a little embargo for the ETDs, but everything is a public license. They have to select which one. And for software development, which I do a lot with students, it's a commercializable MIT public license that allows for commercialization.
Any other questions? Well, I think we're a little bit over time, so I want to thank you so much. What a rich and exciting way to kick off this conference. And we're so excited to have you here with the rest of the community. So I'm sure a lot of future conversations are going to come out of this. So thank you so much.